around reinforcing. You're good. It's around reinforcing effort and providing recognition. So in my district, principals do walk through data, and this is one of the things that they're looking for when they're walking through. And we do this all the time in the art room. And so this is just some strategies that you can use through video demonstrations and strategic seating charts. So Katie's going to be facilitating the chat for me because it is very difficult to both look at the chat and present. So if something comes up, just Katie, shout it out to me if we got lots of questions coming through, okay? So the purpose of this session is that teachers will understand the importance of reinforcing effort. They'll understand how to use video demos and understand how to map out a route and a seating chart to support slow to start students. So why do we provide recognition? It helps to build teacher and student relationships. It creates a culture of positive praise, builds self-confidence, encourages positive self-talk, risk-taking, and perseverance. And those last three are tied to a priority standard that we use in middle school art. It's the Creation 218 standard around persevering through difficult art making tasks. And so we feel this is really closely aligned instructionally and curriculum wise to, some of our big goals in the art room. So starting out with how you run your demonstrations in your classroom. So back in my day when I was a student, we had this gather around the table model. And so the pros were that it was engaging students and community building, and you can circulate while students are working independently. But the cons are that there were oftentimes too many steps to remember, there were misbehaviors, and not all students were engaged. So I remember back in my elementary experience, like we'd all be gathered around and there'd be like a kid poking another kid, right? And you'd be like, I don't know. And then the teacher would send us back to our seat to get started. And like every kid would be like, what was the first step? And so my encouragement is to focus, on trying some other techniques there. So another method can be to project your demo. So you might have some type of document camera or iPad that you can project from. And again, the pros of this are you're engaging students. They can all see the demo and you can monitor behaviors from your front desk area. But one of the downsides that I found was that you felt really tied to the front of the room by your document camera, and you'd have to complete the demo so many times in a day. So for me, like by the time I got to 7th hour, I'd be like, have I told you this yet? Or, I would like forget where I was. And for me personally, I would be way more focused on making sure my art piece looked good, because middle school students can be something else. And that I often wouldn't get a chance to really focus on what the kids were making. So guided practice with video demos is something that I've been doing for the last few years, and it allows you to model techniques and strategies while also circulating to reinforce effort and provide recognition. So I really think that using video demos is this opportunity to be your own co-teacher. So while I'm teaching through a video in the front of the class, I'm also circulating and giving one-on-one support to my students. A benefit is that each class gets consistent information. It allows for chunking. So we know that all of our classes have these different vibes to them. And so it would allow me to pause and work at the pace that the class needed. It allowed me to address a misconception or a reteach in the moment. And the pacing was dictated by the students. I did put flipped learning opportunity for absent students. I'll touch on that in a couple more slides. And it allowed for me to have better classroom management. So I'm wondering from you guys, because I'm definitely feeling that my videos have become less engaging after COVID. I feel like kids were like just videoed out. And I feel in my classroom that I can no longer ask students to like open up their computer and follow along with a video themselves, which, this flipped learning model, this blended learning model was really hot about 10 years ago. And I feel like it's kind of waned a little bit since COVID hit and students were mostly learning online. So the projected video feels more like direct instruction to my students, but it also allows me to, again, be my own co-teacher. But in general, I do feel like videos are less effective now than before remote learning. So you can drop your opinion in the chat if you're feeling that too. So I always want to bring in, that equity lens. And so when we think about, this is a model of culturally responsive practices. This is a Corwin model that we use in my district. And so some of the areas that I feel like we're doing really strong when we provide recognition and reinforce effort is that we're personally inviting. Students get it that we like them. We're making the classroom feel more inviting. We're reinforcing them for academic development. And so the colloquialism for that is like catching the students being smart. And we're singing harmony to our students' songs. So I'm making instructional changes in the moment to kind of accommodate those student differences. And all these slides are posted on the Google Classroom, so don't feel like you have to screenshot or like rush through trying to get this info. So when should you do your videos? You should record your video demo, set aside a time without students to pre-record. I know that it is time invested, typically outside of your contract hours, but it can be reused for each class and even for multiple years. I tend to put a recording in progress sign outside my door so no one disturbs me during my recording process. And my pro tips are to keep it short. Don't re-record because you mess up a small step. It's really humanizing for students to see that we make mistakes and continue moving. And then don't overload it with the hokey music and transitions. I'll like set myself up for jokes that I know I'm going to make in the video demo, like with me talking to them live in class and they think it's real cringy, right? But that's my style. So it can be, again, time invested, but I have at this point, in a lot of the videos I made during COVID years, an opportunity to really be able to use those videos pretty consistently within my classes. So the way it works in my room is I will set the expectations for students to watch a step from the video. And when that's happening, I'm not watching the video, I'm watching my students watch the video, and I might redirect students that are not engaged or are off task during that time. I would then pause the video and again, set the expectation for students to complete the step on their own. I would circulate to reinforce their effort and provide recognition. And then I would repeat that process kind of repeatedly throughout in order to help them get through. Now, this works best with a more guided drawing lesson or a guided painting lesson. So a lot of times for me, it's my skill builders that we'll do a demo for. And then obviously they get to use the medium and the skills and the techniques with their own choice and voice kind of incorporated. So if you're like, oh man, I'm a centers-based teacher, I still think there'd be an opportunity to do a direct guided lesson on maybe a skill builder or a different medium, and then allow them that opportunity to kind of play. Now, the second piece of this is now that I have my video established, I tell teachers, and a lot of them are shocked sometimes, I haven't had a raised hand in my classroom in years. And the reason is that I have a predictable loop for my students when I'm circulating to help. And every student knows what my loop is, so they don't have to kind of like reach out for my attention because they know I'm going to check on everybody every single step. With the push towards belongingness in schools, we recently gave a survey and 10% of our student population said that they go a full day without a single teacher talking to them or engaging with them. And so I really took that one on the nose and I was like, I'll be darned if that happens in my room. So establishing a loop and making sure that I'm consistent with it has allowed me to make sure that I'm touching base with every student, every class period, and oftentimes multiple times throughout that. So I preview the loop with my kids. I have them point where they think I start and where I end. And then we recap again that we don't need to raise hands and like anxious that the teacher is not going to get to me, because I will always make sure I get to everybody. So my classroom looks a lot like the one that's right here on the 7 through 8 thing. But I know that, you know, different classrooms are set up in different ways. And so those are some other loops that work. My biggest suggestion on this one is you wouldn't want to loop this way if you're kind of following my cursor. I've tried the awkward shimmy behind a student and it tends to disrupt the general flow of your loop. So, you know, just trying to find those natural pathways. You probably already have them when you walk around your classroom anyways, but being intentional about sharing those with students really makes it predictable for them. So I'm using this loop in addition to my video demos. And then I also use the loop anytime I'm walking around to check on students. So strategic seating. So the way that I place my students in my loop is very intentional. Now, I don't know about you guys, but the first seating chart of this semester of the year, I kind of just toss them out where I think. And then the second seating chart, which usually comes about 2 weeks into the semester for me, is much more strategic. So you can kind of see my color coding system here. But my red dots are my students who tend to be negative, and they need me to reinforce the first moment that they have their pencil up, so that they can really work themselves through that step of the demo. So they need the reinforcement to start. They rely on the teacher praise to persevere. And I hope in your head, you're thinking of some specific kids that would be good to place at the start of your loop. My yellow students are ones that tend to lack confidence or need reinforcement to go to the next step. So they'll try it at first, but they won't really persevere through maybe something that's difficult for them or a risk unless they get that feedback from me or from their peers. And so you can see like it is not beneficial, I've found, putting a table of all reds together, because then like they just get this like vibe of like real negativity going. So you'll see that I strategically will place my green students, who are those positive peer models. They tend to be front loaded for success, so they don't need much reinforcement from me. And so I really kind of space my greens out, but I put a lot more greens on my back half because I know that they'll keep working through the steps without me. And then I always, keep my reds kind of closer to the front there so I can keep them encouraged as we're working through it. So let's see here. I'm looking in the chat. Hadn't thought of keeping classroom monitoring as a consistent loop. Yeah. And so I think this feels like front loaded, right? Because it is a lot of work at the start, but I think you guys probably already have conceptions about the students in your class. I know elementary teachers, this is so much harder because I think you're seeing like 24 classes in a week. I don't know how you do it. And so maybe you would really just focus in on those students who have a tendency to be negative and won't start without teacher praise, and kind of strategically placing them towards the front half of your loop. And again, this presentation is all posted. But I did want to give some work time. So in the chat, I have the chat window pulled up now if you want to talk to me in the chat. Do you already have a Sunschool loop that you follow in your classroom? Where do you tend to place your struggling students, and where do you tend to place your strong students? So if you will oblige me in the chat, do you have a Sunschool model that you tend to follow? I talked to one teacher when I presented this at the district who said that she keeps the negative kids away from her desk because she doesn't like them bringing down the whole feeling in the classroom. And so I really encouraged her to try to place them towards the start of her loop. So yeah, if anybody feels like drop it in the chat, if you have a Sunschool loop or where you're struggling kiddos, where you're strong kiddos. Give some wait time for typing, hopefully.
Well, I don't know. I'll jump in, Alyssa. You're giving great advice. I've never thought of it, but I do have a loop, and I've never thought of sharing that with the kids. I mean, I kind of place, my kids who might need a break in this part of the room. And I will admit there are some I want to keep away from my desk, but I never sit down during class. So I'm always moving around, but I teach elementary, and I have about 500 plus students. So, about 30 classes a week, 27 to 30. So I don't redo seating charts very often, and I'm new at the school, so I don't know kiddos. So, but I like just the idea of sharing that loop, because I do get around, but you have those kids who are always raising their hand and just, continually wanting that attention. So, and I use the red light, green light, yellow light for different things in my room, but yeah, it totally applies to seating. So thanks.
Thanks for sharing that. Thanks, Holly, for jumping in the chat there. Okay. Oh yeah. So I'm interested about the high school perspective, because I don't know, my vision of high school is they just like, I would just pass out supplies and they would just like do all the things. So Natalie's sharing that she has mixed level classes. So trying to spread out the more experienced kids around the room, and they'll jump in and help beginners. Those moments where a kid feels confident enough to like step in and help other students are so powerful. And for me, like I'll say to a kid 19 times, like push your dark values. And as soon as a peer tells them that, they're like, oh, why didn't I think of that? So I love how the peer modeling can kind of be brought in with that as well.
Yeah. I was going to say, I have 24 kids throwing on a wheel, which a lot of people think is insane to have that many kids throwing at one time. And that is the way that it works, because if all 24 were just totally the first semester throwing, it really would be really difficult. But with me having older kids, first of all, they inspire the newer kids to kind of raise the overall level of work, but they will jump in like and help. And I kind of really push that with the kids, that it's meant to be a collaborative environment. I'm like, this is how this room works, is if you guys are working together. I'm like, so if somebody spills something, I'm like, go, help each other out, because then they'll be helping you at other times. And I mean, I mean, ideally that works all the time, but sometimes, I mean, so, that's not as much always as we'd like, but that is how you get to work, is where you have those people help each other out. I do have kids, you're saying raising hand, and I do have kids raise hand. I mean, I guess raise hands. So when you're saying that, like consistently going out as a loop, I really liked that, because that was something I was like, I need to think about that to make sure I am not missing, I mean, like certain kids, because you do have those needy kids that will like constantly take all of your attention. I think that's a good way of thinking about that. If you're doing a persistent loop, then you make sure you hit it, you're addressing everybody. I like that a lot. I thought that was really good.
Yeah, Katie is saying in the chat that sometimes she feels pulled back and forth across the room with higher needs students. And I 100% lived in that for like my first couple of years teaching. And then the kids would leave and I'd be like, I have no idea what 75% of them worked on today because I was just glued to the side. And so sometimes like I still have those needy students, right? And they might still raise their hand, and then I'll just remind them like, hey, right now I'm at this other part of the loop and I got to make sure these students are on track. I'm going to get to you. So just try to persist through it until I can get to you. And I think it really starts to build some efficacy in them to see if they can solve their own problems instead of just relying on a teacher to come in and kind of bail them out. And so I also think what you're saying, Natalie, really builds a community. And if we think about like what we can do to get our kids to feel like they belong in our school and belong in our classrooms, as they build that sense of community, I've seen like a real shift in students wanting to be there, students carrying the load with cleanup. I feel like that's huge. You can tell if a classroom of kids is bought into your procedures based on, I feel like, how clean your room looks at the end. And when they all start to carry their own weight and they see that community aspect of it, I think that's beautiful. Shelly's sharing in the chat, I have a loop, but I will be more purposeful about using it. Yeah, I think the biggest light bulb moment when I teach this lesson to people is they're like, oh, I already do that. I just didn't tell the kids. So as soon as you kind of like let the kids into that portion of the procedure, they take some ownership too. And I've even heard students like tell each other like, oh, she's going to get to us. So just hang on. And I love seeing those moments where they're like really figuring it out and it's predictable. And there's also a ton of research that the more predictable our classrooms are, the safer our students feel in those spaces. So yeah, thanks for sharing out, guys. This would be really boring if I was just talking to myself. So I appreciate that. So how do we provide recognition? And I know I'm not an expert in this, and the people in this room are educators that I've admired for many years. So, feel free to keep dropping your ideas in the chat here. So when you're providing recognition, do give specific feedback, make sure it's positively framed. And there's a lot of research that shows that when you use student names, that there's like a really positive impact on their education. It shows them that you see them for who they are. And then, on the flip side, don't be generic, don't be too critical too early on, and don't rush through your loop due to time. So this process will pay off in the long run. I think my first couple of years trying this, I would like try to rush through my loop so I could get it in like 6 times per class period. But then those weren't actually meaningful connections I was having with my students. So, and this also grew out of like, it causes me a lot of anxiety having like a line at my desk of kids waiting to talk to me. It makes me feel like I maybe didn't do it right if that many of them have questions. So it also kind of avoids that. But with providing recognition, I'll like at the start of a critique, go through with students and be like, hey, which comment would you rather hear? Your project looks cool. Or I love how you spent time developing the lettering and the message that it carries. And students, they're middle schoolers. So sometimes they'll sabotage my thing. They'll be like, I like the one where you said it was cool. But when we unpack it, they really say like, when you compliment me on something that just I did, it makes me feel like you took the time to really recognize me. And sometimes they like will flame other teachers and I have to like shut it down because they'll be like, yeah, for sure, Miss So-and-so, just copy and paste the comments. But kids, like they pick up on that. So, feedback doesn't have to happen constantly. But if you're going to take the time to invest in it, really make sure that you're using that as an opportunity to have those micro moments or those one-on-one connections with your students. So the stages of artistic development. How many of us had to study this in our art ed stuff? Did you guys do that? The Kerr-Lavage and Lowenfield article. So I come back to this a lot because I'll see things happening in my room and then I'll be like, oh yeah, that's super developmentally where we're at. So our pre-K through second grade, they're in the pre-schematic mark making stage. So for them, expression over realism, we see floating shapes, arbitrary colors. And then in the third and fourth, they switch to the schematic symbol making, and you can kind of read over what that looks like. Fifth and sixth grade is the dawn of realism and that emerging expertise. 7th through 9th, these are my babies. They're in their decision stage and their artistic challenges. And in the Cours Lavage article, they say like a lot of students in the middle school decide if they're ever going to make art again. And they really only equate good art, right, with things that look hyper realistic. And so that's definitely something to keep in mind. And then for my high school teachers, but if you have 9th grade freshmen, they're still there. But our 10th through 12th graders start to recognize the creative process and concept and technique kind of working in harmony. So what does that mean for recognition? Well, for recognition, that's going to be developmentally appropriate at each level. Praise experimentation with those pre-K through 2nd graders. Praising experimentation early can help instill in them that that's an important skill to have in the art room. And I promise you as a middle school teacher, I will thank you over and over again if you can just help praise that experimentation early on. For our 3rd and 4th graders, since they're really focused in on that symbol making, praise the meaning behind their work. For 5th and 6th grade, this is when they're emerging, that expertise, you want to praise their efforts and how they're continuing to persevere through something. For 7th through 9th graders, I tend to focus on praising individual growth. Middle schoolers have this concept that like they need to be the best in the class. And so they really compare their work to other students, which we know can be very harmful in their development. So praising their individual growth, I do a lot of like pre and post stuff where I'll have them draw a portrait without any guidance from me. And then, we'll look at it compared to their final portrait. And I try to really make the connection to them that the more they invest time, that's what actually develops into something that they're proud of versus the more like naturally gifted in art they are. And I think it makes it more approachable for all students. In middle school, we encounter a lot of fixed mindsets around art where they'll be like, I'm not good at drawing, so I don't want to be in this class. And so I think really focusing in on that individual growth aspect can help unlock some pieces for them. And then in the 10th through 12th grade, you can begin to provide criticism in addition to praise. And so really focusing in on getting them ready to look critically at their own work now that they've kind of developed and established an identity within their art making. Some asterisks down here at the bottom. Remember, all students are individuals and may progress through the stages differently. So take the time to get to know your specific students to provide the best recognition for them. Oh, thanks for that shout out, Katie. Yes, this slide is available in my presentation. So feel free to screenshot and spread it around like wildfire. Let's praise these kids. That's an example of a video demo. I'm not going to make you watch it, but if you're curious how I do it, I'm real cringy, real dorky. I do oohs and ahs in my videos. I tell the kids that I'm the one who made the video. So like early on when I started doing this, they were like, who's this crazy person on YouTube? And I was like, that's me. Because I think they're used to maybe some of their teachers using videos from other artists. So I told them early on, like, this is me, be kind, don't flame the video. And just to make it extra cringy, I'm always like, smash that subscribe button at the end. And they're like, oh my God, why are you like this? But, be authentic to yourself in your videos. That's what I'm saying. No, I don't want to play it. There we go. Okay, so here are some art room impacts that I've found from establishing a loop and consistently using video demonstrations. So again, students feel like the art is more approachable and less talent-based, so it helps with that growth mindset. And the impacts that I've seen is that it's really increased our enrollment at the middle school level, and it's also increased the enrollment at the high school that my students feed into. So they were able to hire like an additional art teacher because so many more kids were enrolling in that intro class. And I really feel like through conversations with them, that it's because students feel like there's an open door now to art making, that it's not like just the good art kids should take art, that it's really this opportunity for self-expression, and you don't have to be the best artist in the room to feel successful in there. And then I also feel like students feel super successful in the demo, so then they'll take bigger risks in the creation tasks. I sometimes think about teaching as like a tire rolling down the hill, and like when it starts to curve, you got to kind of smack it the other way. But don't smack your kids, but you know what I mean? Give them feedback to kind of course correct there. And so I feel like throughout a demo, like a kid's not going to get to the end of a class period with me and have nothing on their paper or have a paper that's ripped up or crumpled up. There's going to be adjustments that we make throughout the process that help them to feel successful by the end of it. And here's some student testimony. So my students, I just, I interview my kids all the time and ask them like, does that feel weird or good? Or what do you think about that? And so I had a student share, I feel like I can't fail with Miss Passmore's demos because she's always coming around to help. And then another student said, I love when Miss Passmore shouts me out for being a good artist, even when I thought I was bad. And so just to share a little testimony about my buddy here, Trevion, he was one of my red dots and he was right next to my desk. He was very self-critical in his art making. And, one of our learning targets to build towards perseverance in the art room is training ourselves to have positive self-talk, taking a deep breath, thinking about what motivates us. Some students are motivated by the grade in the grade book. I had one student write that they were motivated to not get a lecture from their parents. So whatever motivates them, figure out a way to incorporate that. But Trevion was a student that I had identified as somebody who had a really low self-efficacy around his art making. And so I was layering on that positive praise. He was starting to do his positive self-talk himself. And when we got finished with our self-portraits, something that we do in my cafeteria is we'll scroll through student artwork on the TVs. And you guys, I almost cried when my principal shared this moment with me. Trevion made my principal pause the TV on his artwork, announced it to the whole cafeteria that it was his, and then got a standing ovation from his peers. So to have a student who started out saying he's not good at art, he doesn't want to be in the class, he can't draw, into literally stopping the entire cafeteria to acknowledge his work, I feel like really shows that sometimes the growth is not in the art making skills, but it's in the self-efficacy piece and the confidence piece. And I feel like all of those are built in through providing that recognition and acknowledging their efforts. So video used to support absent students. This is, I think, still a good purpose. I don't know about anybody else out there in the world, but attendance has been really spotty since COVID. So students are like consistently not coming to school. And I feel like in art making classes where it's mostly hands-on, it can be really difficult to figure out how to get them caught back up. So we have a seminar time at the secondary level. And so I'll still bring kids in and I will like monitor them while they're doing the demo with the video. But to be able to, again, split myself in my classroom to like, okay, you three are working on this demo. Here's the supplies. You two need help with this. You need some extra time. Really just allows me to be able to move more freely throughout my room and support more students at a single given time. I know in elementary, at least in our district, we have iPads in the elementary schools. So creating a QR code for students to scan and get them directly to the video. There is a lot of research that you lose most kids after 2 clicks. So I was thinking about the way that my Canvas course is set up, and I'm 4 clicks away from getting them into the content that I need them in. And so really trying to figure out how to streamline that process that students don't get lost is going to be helpful.
Alyssa, there's a question in the chat. Love that you seek your students' opinion. What does your interviewing your students look like?
Yeah. So I don't know. Some teachers might say I have like boundary issues with my kids because I think that they're just as important in the learning process. Like I by no means think I'm an expert. Like I've got a couple more skills than they do, but they're the ones who know if it's engaging or not. And so I think when we finish a lesson like 5 minutes early, I think like a natural inclination is like, okay, I'm going to go back behind my desk and try to knock out my to-do list. But I'm not that teacher. And so I'll sit at the table with them and I'll be like, okay, you guys were my guinea pigs. So how did that go? And like middle school students are just super honest. I'll ask more targeted questions too. In the EDI one, I was sharing that I do a Mexican folk art unit. And so I would stop and ask my kids after the class, students that I had relationships with for sure, not just like, a random kid in the hallway. And I'll be like, hey, did that feel like I was honoring your cultural heritage, or did that feel really weird coming off from, a white lady up here talking about Mexican folk art? And I think my students trust me enough to be really honest with me. I used to do anonymous feedback, and I don't do that anymore because when you put the anonymous tag on it, students were writing some not so nice and not so kind things on there, mostly about like my physical appearance. So I kind of like cut any type of anonymous feedback, and now I just ask them a little bit more targeted questions. So I also do a ton of informal check-ins. So like with my video pacing, I'll be like, thumbs up if that's a good pace, thumbs down if you feel like it's going too fast. And even if I have 1 thumbs down, all right, we're going to put a pause. We're going to take 30 more seconds between rounds on this. And so I really like to course correct in the moment. I'm the type of teacher that if a lesson flops, I'll scrap it and try something different the next hour. And I feel like that's like a beautiful thing about being an art teacher. Man, I talk to my friends that are like ELA teachers and they're like, if I'm not on this standard on this day, like all hell will break loose. And I'm like, man, like I get to course correct like in the moment and be like, that did not work. Let's try something new. So that's kind of more of like what I have with interviewing. We also have seminar time, which I don't think elementary gets that. And that's an opportunity that I really have to just kind of sit and chat with my kids. And, maybe it's about the Chiefs game, maybe it's about what we're learning in art. It kind of varies. But I feel like the open aspect, like the open communication aspect, like my kids don't ever feel like they can't give me feedback on my lesson. I try to elicit feedback on my lessons as much as I can. Great point, emphasizing that. Yeah. I think that was probably the biggest impact on enrollment for me, Natalie, was really changing this mindset that only the good art kids should enroll in art. And I, in fact, take it a step further and I'm like, if you're a good thinker, then I need you. I can teach you the art skills, but if you're good at thinking about things, if you're creative, if you're unique, those are the kids that I try to really push in my art classes. And then Karen Garrity Folk's son is coming to Hawker next year. Yeah, I'm so excited. But she got to experience all of the materials that I send out to sixth graders. So I have like a why take art thing. And, what if I can't draw? And then I'll have like my response, like, I'll teach you how to draw. I just need you to know how to think. And I have a video that we send out to all the sixth graders that's like real hokey with like, this could be you next year in my room. And so I think all those things really help to kind of open it up too. I really think right now in my district, we're really trying to get kids to find that connection between effort and results. I think a lot of students are like, oh, you either have it or you don't. And I think that's, math, science, ELA, and art. And so we're trying to develop some rubrics that really show them like, hey, I went back and tried something after receiving feedback, that's going to be linked to a stronger end result. Or I persisted through something that was difficult and continued to push myself instead of giving up. And that's directly linked to a work that I'm proud of. So really trying to connect those things for kids, I've seen have a really positive impact. So how am I doing on time? Oh man, I'm a fast talker. What else is new?
You're doing good. I was going to mention your last slide where you're talking about having like absent students watch videos on Canvas. I like that a lot and I've used it, but we have Canvas too, which is like Google Classroom. But I have also found that I will preload the next lesson. So students that are working faster ahead, I will tell them they can go ahead and move on to the next thing. So maybe I'm not doing it as a class, but they can go ahead and if they want, can watch videos and go on to, the next kind of unit. So you can do it both ways, both addressing like the lower, the kids that are behind or have been absent, but then also the kids that are working ahead can use those resources too.
I love that as an opportunity for extension too. My district's like real obsessed with the 4 PLC questions. We get dedicated PLC time every week as a middle school horizontal team, which is like just beautiful. But I feel like we miss the mark a lot with our extension kids, like our early finishers or the ones who are kind of front loaded. And like my go-to is just to be like, work in your sketchbook. And by about the 3rd project, kids are like, okay, what else could I do? And so I think really using like the videos and the preview aspect of Canvas to be able to push their thinking, that's still teacher facilitated, but not teacher guided. Because I don't know about you guys, but when I'm in my reteach mode and I'm trying to get those kids that are at a 1 or a 2 up to grade level, sometimes my extension kids fall off the back end a little bit because I'm like so hyper focused on trying to get the rest of the kids caught up. So I think that's a great idea, Natalie. What a great suggestion there. So reviewing some concepts that I hope we learned. You can give me feedback if we didn't touch on these, but just really focusing on understanding the importance of reinforcing effort and providing recognition. I shared again in the EDI thing this morning. We recently had a student panel where our high school kids told us what they needed to feel successful. And it was students from marginalized groups across our district. And out of 16 of them said it takes one teacher believing in them, pushing them to make them feel like they belong and should keep coming to school. And I was really trying to think about how that applies to us. And I think that math teachers are going out telling their kids like, hey, you need to be in advanced geometry or whatever. And like, do we feel like we hustle that as hard in the art area? You know, if you're an elementary teacher, are you telling that kid like, oh, I've already told that middle school teacher about you and they can't wait to get their hands on you. Like you're such a talented artist. And, you know, I think kids will take more risks. Kids will believe in themselves more if we kind of show them the way on that. And so, you know, I know it's corny, but all it takes is one teacher to help, you know, push those kids to believing in themselves. And then, you know, making sure you utilize that age appropriate recognition, creating a culture of positive praise and modeling that positive self-talk. I didn't touch on that much, but in the videos that I make, I'll be like, okay, right now I'm frustrated. So I'm taking a deep breath. Or I'll be like, okay, Ms. Passmore, you got this. You got this. A little bit of a struggle, but we're going to figure it out. And so I really try to verbalize like what I'm saying to myself in my head, which seems ridiculous, right? But our kids don't know how to do it. Or, you know, I have some students who maybe don't have like the most beautiful home life and they internalize the negative voice. And that's the one that they keep saying to themselves when they're in the middle of an art making task. So trying to counteract that can be extremely helpful, I think. Teachers will understand how to use video demos as a way to increase that one-on-one student support. It sounds like a lot of you guys already have these videos like ready to go. So utilize those pre-recorded videos, think about that predictable loop and share it with your kids, and spend time connecting with and building up your students at each step of the way in your art making. And then, you know, hopefully the results are that students feel seen, connected with, supported, and establish a lifelong love of art. Even though, you know, I don't have many kids that I think go through my house that are going to be like a professional artist when they grow up, I do feel like I've kind of shifted the needle for kids to see that like art is a really healthy way to get emotions out. Art is a way to communicate like all the things that you're riled up about. And all of those things I think will help build that lifelong love of art. And then kind of driving back, this is something that's in our strategic plan and Shawnee mission. And that's the unwavering belief that every individual has inherent worth and deserves to be valued and celebrated. And so kind of bringing in those belonging pieces as well. So here is my contact info, my little cute Bitmoji. My hair has grown out a lot since then, got to change that. But feel free to reach out to me if you want help with I've had people send me pictures of their classrooms and be like, what loop are you thinking for this? Especially, man, some of those secondary classes that have like 32 kids in them, and those kids are big, you know, and they're like, I don't know how I'm getting through this room every time. So, you know, feel free to shoot me an email if you have questions about anything. And we have like 10 minutes. So we could just like open a discussion, maybe. Katie, what are you thinking?
Yeah, I think just let people talk. Don't want to start too early in case somebody was like running late and, you know, wanted to make sure they were on at a certain time.
Yeah. So what are you having?
Can I read your recruitment letter?
Yeah.
Okay. Why take art? You get to take home the things you make. You get a brain break from your core classes. It's a place to make new friends. You get to express yourself. You make fun projects. Making art lowers your stress levels. And the art teachers are so fun.
That one's confirmed. So, I mean, does anybody else do like a recruitment effort to the grade below or the grade above? Like, I know it can be so hard in our smaller districts, right? Because maybe you don't have a ton of time to interact, or maybe like some of you are doing K-12. So like you are the person from start to finish. But yeah, what does recruitment efforts look like in your respective areas?
I start talking to middle schoolers and tell them like, okay, so what art class are you going to take next year? And really encouraging them to do that, especially like my middle school student last year that got first in the Blick Yam contest. He is not in art this year, but I'm hoping he will be. I know, because it's kind of not cool to like art if you're a boy here, like in some groups. So I'm working on that, but his mom did say like the Youth Art Month show was a really big encouragement to him. And he kind of started to be like, oh, maybe I should do this. So hopefully next year I'll get him. They open up and get a few more electives their sophomore year. I find sometimes I actually have to tell my sixth graders, we have 7th and 8th grade middle school, not tell them not to take art. I don't want to sound like that, but sometimes they have to choose between band and art, which is really sad. Like they're opposite. And our band program we've had a lot of turnover. So it's really dropped. So sometimes I'll tell them like, well, if you're really trying to decide, stick with band, because you can still come in and, if you want to do the contest, you can still come in, I'll help you. You can still do art and you can do some of that stuff on your own, but I don't want them to miss out on that, like playing with a group, since they're trying to build that program back up. But yeah, it's really unfortunate that they have to choose between those, because I tend to get all the kids who aren't in band or sometimes aren't in choir, and they like one semester and then they flip flop. So I have 8th grade in the fall, 7th grade in the spring. So I wish they could figure out how to schedule that differently. It's hard.
I big time feel like the electives are in opposition of each other at the middle school level. Like we're all fighting for the same numbers. And sometimes it can be like not pretty, because like, I don't know, we have our Spanish program is like a high school certificate, like you can get high school credit for it. And so like, they like push so hard, and those parents, that carrot is just too sweet to think that their kid could get high school credit in middle school, that it sometimes does like create some tension, I feel like, within the programs. Charlene, it looks like you wanted to chime in. Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, when you're in those small schools, like a K-12, I think that is totally true. It's where I came from. I couldn't sing and I couldn't play an instrument, so I got sent to art. I had power tools too, but I had a mechanic dad, so I was good. But there just aren't the choices, and you find that that's what kids have to choose. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Something that I kind of aired a grievance about in our middle school division meeting at our last one is our district provides intervention classes as electives. So like if they're in a reading or a math workshop, then they don't get art, band, choir, any of it, which I really struggle with, because I was so bad at math and I really disliked it. And if somebody told me I had to take a double of the class I was bad at, and you took away the one class I felt success in, I felt like that would be a great way to lower my efficacy for school. So that's kind of a conversation that I'm continuing to have at the district level with, some of our cabinet members and stuff.
I do put up a display in the spring when students are choosing their classes, especially like for middle school to high school, that just shows them what the classes are. Since many of my high school classes are set up CTE, we're trying to do like the CTE stuff and the traditional stuff at the same time. So like graphic design is kind of half actual graphic design and then half art one. And then computer graphics, they don't know what that is. So I'll put up student samples and then just like say what the class is and like, here's why you should take this class. Or I'll send out, well, what if you think you're not good at drawing? Well, you might be more comfortable in this class because we do more on the computer and less, with pencil and paper. So I just try to kind of educate them and get them excited about it. But I think it's a great idea to send a letter if the students don't already know you, if they haven't had a chance to meet you before. They know me from, kindergarten on up, but it's a little different.
Well, I'll chime in on that. We're at our district, we're building a new middle school. So we have the largest middle school right now in the state. And so we'll have 2, but we're moving our 6th graders to the 7th grade. So we've just started having those to the 7th, 8th grade, to the middle school level. And I'm at the elementary, but we were trying to talk about how to get the kids to see the big picture. What does that look like? And we kind of, I like your recruitment letter. I think that sounds great. We were kind of trying to think of doing it visually with, in this class, this is what you get. And we're not even sure exactly what the 6th grade art's going to look like, 7th and 8th, and how that's going to fit into the CTE. And, that's all kind of being developed. But we had talked about how colleges send out those recruitment posters with, this, and that. What if we did that for the high school art class, for the middle school art class, kind of to have like, again, your interviews with your students, just a little quick blurb or something. And that was an idea. So that recruitment letter, yeah, I like the way that works. So good ideas.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate everybody's willingness to connect through this session. I know it was a heavy teacher talk one, but I feel like I get life from hearing the ideas from this group. And I was so excited to get the opportunity to present. Thanks again, Katie, for setting this up. And thanks again to everybody who was willing to kind of chime in and save me from talking to myself this whole session. It looks like we have Natalie up at 11. So I'm going to hop off for another bio break because I was chugging water that whole time. But like conversations can continue. Katie, do you got anything to add?
Nope. I'm going to stop the recording for now. And yeah, if you want to follow along, Natalie has a supply list. I'll just read it real quick and then you can be a good opportunity to gather things up. She said decorative paper, drawing paper or plain paper, Elmer's glue or Mod Podge, paintbrush, tag board or a scrap of thin mat board, ruler, X-Acto knife, thin wire, pliers or wire cutters, and or jewelry findings, any mini embellishments. I can post that in the chat too. So good opportunity to get organized for our next one.
Yeah, I got to go get